No one dared claim the wild alien girl until a human placed his bid. The gavel's echo was lost in the opulent hush of the obsidian bloom auction hall. On the central dais contained within a shimmering cage of hard light, the asset thrashed. She was a Lorian, a creature of pale gray skin stretched taut over a frame of whipcord muscle and surgical steel. Scars, pale and puckered, mapped a history of violence across her body. Her hair was a mane of thick, dark cords that writhed with her every movement, and her eyes, the color of molten gold, burned with feral hatred. Long, pointed ears were pinned back against her skull in a display of pure aggression. The auctioneer, a gaunt Cephos in robes the color of dried blood, let the silence hang, a showman savoring the fear of his audience. His voice was a dry, sibilant whisper that slithered from the hall's audio emitters. Lot 734, an Omnicorp asset, designation Chimera, a bioengineered soldier with Class 4 regenerative abilities, enhanced reflexes, and certain behavioral complications. A low, guttural snarl erupted from the cage as Vera slammed her shoulder against the energy field, causing it to hiss and spit. A nervous murmur rippled through the gallery of arms dealers, corporate agents, and syndicate lords. Her combat effectiveness is unparalleled, the auctioneer continued, unperturbed. She is also responsible for the termination of 17 handlers and 2 previous owners. Omnicorp considers her a failed prototype. Their loss is your potential gain. We will open the bidding at 200,000 credits. Silence. No one moved. Owning her wasn't a matter of wealth, it was a question of life expectancy. Elias stood in the shadows at the back, a ghost in a simple dark jacket amidst the gaudy finery. He ignored the spectacle, his attention fixed on the small datapad in his hand. On its screen, a torrent of corrupted code flowed, a chaotic visualization of the agony an implant was inflicting on the creature in the cage. It was his code, twisted, weaponized, but unmistakably his. The synaptic weave, a technology he had designed to heal, had been warped into an instrument of torture. The feedback loops were burning her alive from the inside out. This wasn't a monster. It was a victim, screaming in a language only he could understand. "Do I have 200,000? The auctioneer purred. A corpulent Vodran warlord shifted, his gelatinous form quivering, but his hand stayed down. Even he wasn't reckless enough. 150, then? A bargain for such spirited property. The silence stretched thick and suffocating. The auctioneer's professional calm began to fray. Disposing of the asset was proving difficult. Elias's jaw tightened. He had tracked his stolen work across 5 systems, following whispers of an unstable corporate weapon. He had imagined a drone, a mindless battlesuit. Not this, not a living being trapped in a prison of his own design. Guilt was a physical weight in his chest. 100,000, the auctioneer sighed, his tone bordering on pleading. Elias raised his hand a single steady motion. 500,000 credits, he said. His voice, calm and unamplified, cut through the hall like a scalpel. Every head turned. A wave of astonishment washed over the gallery. Who was this human? What foolish bravado was this? The auctioneer's slit-like eyes widened for a fraction of a second. "I have a bid of 500,000 from the human gentleman," he announced, his composure restored. "Do I hear 6? No one countered. They stared at Elias, a mix of pity and contempt on their alien features. He had just signed his own death warrant. In the cage, Vera stilled, her golden eyes locking onto his for the first time. The raw hatred in them was now tinged with a flicker of confusion. 500,000 going once, the auctioneer called. Going twice. He paused, scanning the room one last time. Sold to the human with more credits than sense. The hard light cage pulsed and vanished. The transaction was complete. Elias's accounts, the sum of a lifetime of brilliant haunted work, were empty, and now he owned the galaxy's most dangerous failed experiment. The transfer from the auction block to the docking bay was a tense, silent procession. 2 hulking mercenaries, one a scaly reptilian and the other a wiry, 4-armed insectoid, flanked Vera. They had fitted her with a neural inhibitor collar, a crude device that sent jolts of agony through her system at the slightest sign of aggression. She walked with a stiff, coiled grace, her jaw clenched so tightly Elias could see the muscles bunching under her gray skin. He followed a few paces behind, his hands steady, his face a mask of professional calm he did not feel. "You're sure about this, human?" the reptilian rumbled, his voice like grinding rocks. "The collar's on max. It'll fry her circuits if she tries anything, but with this one." "I'm sure," Elias said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Just get her onto the ramp of the Penance." His ship was a small, unassuming vessel, more floating workshop than transport, tucked away in the grimiest corner of the bay. As they approached the open ramp, the ship's internal lights cast a sterile white glow onto the stained durasteel floor. Vera hesitated at the edge of the light, her pointed ears twitching. The insectoid guard prodded her forward with an electrified baton. It was a mistake. The jolt of the baton, combined with the inhibitor collar's oppressive signal, was too much for the already overloaded synaptic weave. Vera screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony that was part animal rage and part machine shriek. Her body convulsed violently. The collar sparked and shorted out. In the next instant, she moved. It wasn't a conscious attack. It was a system crash. A purge of all motor function control. She launched herself backward, the broken restraints on her wrists whipping through the air. One arm caught the insectoid across its narrow thorax, the impact shattering its exoskeleton. The other hand, fingers curled into a claw, found the reptilian's throat. There was a wet, tearing sound, and the massive guard collapsed without a gurgle. It was over in less than 2 seconds. Vera stood panting over the bodies, her chest heaving, the golden light in her eyes flickering like dying embers. Then her legs buckled, and she crumpled to the deck, unconscious. Elias hadn't moved. His heart hammered against his ribs, but his hands were already at his belt, retrieving a small cylindrical device. He approached her cautiously, stepping over the spreading pool of alien blood. He knelt beside her, his movements slow and deliberate. He wasn't a fighter, but he understood the machine inside her head better than anyone. He activated the device. It emitted a low, almost sub-audible hum, a carefully calibrated frequency designed to harmonize with the weave's core programming. It was a failsafe he had built into his original design, a diagnostic tool to soothe chaotic feedback. As the frequency washed over her, the violent tremors racking her body began to subside. The frantic, jagged lines of code on his datapad smoothed into softer waves. The change was subtle, but it was there. She was still in pain, but the acute, system-breaking agony had receded. He watched her for a long moment, the architect of her suffering and her only possible salvation. Then, with a grunt of effort, he began to drag the bodies of the guards off his ramp. He sealed the ship's main door, the heavy thud echoing in the sudden profound silence. They were alone. The medical bay of the Penance was small, sterile, and lined with diagnostic equipment. It was the only room on the ship with a reinforced door and an atmospheric seal, and it was where Vera now lay on a padded biobed. Elias watched her on a monitor from the adjacent control room, separated by a thick pane of transparent aluminum. It wasn't a prison, he told himself. It was a quarantine. A necessary precaution for them both. When she awoke, she did so with the explosive suddenness of a predator. One moment, she was still. The next, she was on her feet, crouching, her yellow eyes scanning every corner of the room. She tested the door, her powerful fists leaving dents in the reinforced metal, before she turned her burning gaze to the window, to him. "I'm not going to hurt you," Elias said, his voice calm through the room's intercom. "My name is Elias. I built the technology in your head. I want to take it out." Her response was a low growl, the sound vibrating with a threat that needed no translation. Her ears were flat against her skull, her lips pulled back to reveal sharp white teeth. She didn't believe him. Why should she? He was just another voice on the other side of a barrier, another captor. He sighed, turning to his console. Words were useless. He would have to speak her language, the language of the weave. He initiated a connection, a wireless handshake with the implant. It was like reaching into a fire. A storm of chaotic data flooded his console, pain, rage, fear, all amplified and distorted by the military overrides Omnicorp had layered over his work. He didn't try to push back or take control. Instead, he sent a simple, clean diagnostic signal, a carrier wave of pure data. He began mapping the damage, tracing the corrupted pathways, identifying the feedback loops that were causing her seizures. In the med bay, Vera flinched. She clutched her head, a confused snarl on her lips. This was new. It wasn't the blunt, painful shock of an inhibitor. It was a precise touch, a question asked in a language she didn't know she knew. Her pain spiked, a red line on his monitor, a silent scream of data. In response, he modulated his frequency, sending a soothing counterwave, the same one he'd used on the ramp. The red line wavered, then dipped slightly. Her snarling subsided into ragged breaths. This was their first conversation. He sent a query pulse to her auditory processing center. Her ears twitched. She sent a spike of agony from her motor cortex. He responded with a gentle, oscillating frequency that eased the phantom pains in her limbs. Hours passed like this, a slow, painstaking dialogue of pure sensation. He learned the rhythm of her pain, the shape of her rage. She, in turn, learned that his presence in her mind was not a violation, but a balm. Finally, he took a risk. He isolated a single, uncorrupted memory file from his own neural link, the one he used to interface with his systems, and projected it. It was a memory of him, years younger, sketching the initial designs for the synaptic weave on a holographic tablet. The vision was filled with his own feelings from that time: excitement, hope, the dream of helping soldiers with nerve damage, of allowing amputees to feel their prosthetic limbs as if they were their own. There was no malice in it, only creation. Vera stumbled back, her eyes wide. She saw him. She saw his intent. The rage in her eyes didn't vanish, but it was joined by something else, a flicker of profound confusion. For the first time since he had bought her, she wasn't coiled to strike. Her fists slowly, hesitantly, uncurled at her sides. The deeper Elias delved into the synaptic weave's architecture, the more horrified he became. Omnicorp's engineers had been brutally efficient. They had taken his elegant code, designed for healing and sensory feedback, and twisted it into a cage. They had walled off her higher cognitive functions, shackling her mind to her primal instincts and turning her into a living weapon that operated on pure, agonizing reflex. But their arrogance had left a back door. They hadn't fully understood the complexity of his design. The weave was meant to integrate, to learn. Before the military overrides had fully locked her down, the system had done exactly what it was designed to do. It had created a backup. He found it partitioned in a ghost sector of the memory core, shielded by layers of his own forgotten encryption. It was an anomaly, a perfect, uncorrupted snapshot of Vera's consciousness archived in the first picosecond of activation. It was her mind, whole and untraumatized. He established a connection, a simple text-based data link. The response was instantaneous. "Where am I?" The text scrolled across his monitor, stark and clean against the chaotic background noise of the active system. Elias's breath hitched. "You're inside the synaptic weave. I am Elias. I created it." There was a pause, a data stream flicker that felt like a sharp intake of breath. The pain, it's gone, but I can feel it. Out there, it's me. Elias explained the situation, how her physical self was trapped in a fugue state, a prisoner in her own body, while this pure copy of her consciousness had been locked away. This ghost Vera was lucid, intelligent, and terrified. She described the feeling of being a helpless observer, watching through a fractured lens as her own body was forced to commit acts of violence, all while experiencing a constant, screaming agony she was partitioned from but could still sense. They made her a monster, the ghost typed, the words carrying a profound sorrow. But that's not who she is, who we are. The stakes of his mission changed in that instant. This was no longer just about removing a piece of hardware. It was a rescue operation, a soul retrieval. "Can you help me?" Elias sent. "Her mind is a maze of corrupted data and military firewalls. I can't navigate it alone." "Those red zones are her pain," the ghost replied. "They are what keep her from thinking, from being whole. I can't disable them, but I know their shape. I can guide you through them. I can show you the way." A partnership was formed in that silent digital space. He was the surgeon, and she was the map. The true intimacy of his task began not with the snarling creature in the med bay, but with the ghost in the machine. He learned her thoughts, her fears, her dry, cynical wit that had survived even this. She, in turn, saw into his mind, his guilt, his shame, his desperate need for redemption. They worked together, two minds united in a single purpose, to save the woman they both were, in their own ways. With the ghost Vera as his guide, Elias could finally begin his real work. She showed him the hidden pathways, the back doors in the Omnicorp code that even its creators didn't know existed. They were his own signatures, the unique flourishes of a master coder, now used to subvert the very system he had built. Together, they mapped a route to the Weave's primary governor, the central hub that controlled the pain-inducing feedback loops. He couldn't disable it completely without risking a catastrophic neural cascade, but he could create a temporary bypass. It will only last a few moments at a time, Elias explained, his fingers flying across the holographic interface while his mind was linked with hers. But it should be enough to break the fugue state, to give her a window of clarity. Do it, the ghost urged. Let her see you, let her know. He compiled the code and ran the bypass. On his monitor, the violent red spikes of Vera's neural activity flattened into a steady, calm wave. In the med bay, the physical Vera, who had been pacing like a caged animal, froze. The tension drained from her body. Her shoulders, perpetually hunched, straightened. She slowly lifted her head, and for the first time, her luminous yellow eyes focused on him with undeniable clarity and intelligence. The feral beast was gone. In its place was a person. She took a hesitant step toward the transparent aluminum window, her movements fluid and deliberate. She raised a hand, placing it on the cool surface. Her gaze was intense, searching. Her lips, usually pulled back in a snarl, parted slightly. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was a low, rough whisper, hoarse from disuse, but it was a word, a question. Before Elias could answer, a flicker of pain crossed her face, her hand clenched into a fist. The bypass was already failing, the agony was returning. With a guttural cry, she staggered back as the weave reasserted its brutal control. But the moment had happened. It was real. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He sent the thought through the weave, a raw pulse of regret and determination. "I promise, I will get you out of there." That moment became their new purpose. The brief windows of lucidity were their lifeline. Elias started using them not just for diagnostics, but for connection. With the ghost's help, he began sharing parts of himself, pushing small, sensory memories through the weave. He sent her the rich, bitter taste of his morning coffee, the cool sensation of rain on his skin from a childhood memory, the complex, soaring melody of a classical symphony he loved. They were simple things, human things, fragments of a life lived without pain. It was a strange and deeply intimate courtship. During her lucid moments, the physical Vera would stand at the window, her eyes closed, as she experienced these sensations for the first time. A small, wondrous smile would touch her lips as she heard the music. A tear would trace a path through the grime on her cheek as she felt the memory of rain. He was not just healing her body. He was reminding her mind of what it meant to live. He was falling in love, not just with the intelligent ghost or the fierce survivor, but with the whole, fractured person they formed together. Jax moved through the underbelly of Xylos like a wraith in a tailored corporate suit. His cybernetic eyes scanned heat signatures and data trails with cold efficiency. He was Omnicorp's finest recovery agent, a relentless bloodhound of stolen assets. The nervous, rodent-like info broker who had sold Elias the auction key squealed and gibbered as Jax's chrome-plated fingers tightened around his throat. Information was swiftly extracted. The auctioneer, a being of ancient and unflappable protocol, was more difficult, but ultimately yielded the penance's registration and departure vector when presented with an Omnicorp warrant that was as much a threat as it was a legal document. Aboard the penance, a shrill alarm shattered the quiet intensity of Elias's work. Red lights flashed across the cockpit console. "What is it?" Elias asked, startled, his link to the weave momentarily severed. "Incoming priority message," the ship's computer stated in its flat, monotone voice. "Source: Omnicorp Private Network. It's a tracking virus. It was embedded in the final transaction file from the auction." On the main screen, a symbol bloomed, Omnicorp's stylized Planet and Gear logo, followed by a simple, chilling message: Reclaim initiated. Asset 734 is the property of Omnicorp. Surrender the asset or be neutralized. "They found us," Elias breathed, a knot of ice forming in his stomach. He brought up the tactical display. A single vessel, sleek and predatory, was closing on their position at an impossible speed, a corporate gunship, bristling with weapons. Jax, the ghost Vera sent through their private link, the text appearing in his vision. He had told her about Omnicorp's agents. He's their best. In the medbay, the physical Vera sensed the change. The ship's vibrations shifted as Elias pushed the engines to their limit. His fear, his adrenaline, was a sharp, metallic taste bleeding through the weave. She began to pace, her movements tight and agitated, a low growl rumbling in her chest. "I have to run," Elias said, his hands flying over the navigation controls. "I can't fight that thing." He plotted a course for the nearest navigational hazard, a dense, chaotic asteroid field known as the Veil, a place where sensors were unreliable and smaller ships could, with luck, disappear. No, the ghost's message flashed. She doesn't want to run. The pain, it's turning into anger. She wants to fight. Elias glanced at the monitor showing the medbay. Vera had stopped pacing. She stood facing the window, her body coiled like a spring, her golden eyes blazing with a fire he hadn't seen before. It wasn't the blind rage of agony. It was the focused, lethal fury of a cornered warrior. She was a weapon, and for the first time, she had a target. The Penance was a rock skipping across a cosmic storm. Asteroids the size of mountains tumbled through the void around them, their pitted surfaces glinting in the light of a distant nebula. Elias's knuckles were white on the piloting controls, his face beaded with sweat. Alarms shrieked as proximity alerts triggered one after another. Behind them, Jax's gunship, the Terminus, weaved through the debris with unnerving grace, its weapon ports glowing with malevolent energy. A volley of plasma fire stitched across their stern, making the entire ship groan in protest. "Shields at 60%, the computer announced. "I can't do both," Elias grunted, wrestling the ship through a tight corkscrew maneuver to avoid a collision. "I can't fly this ship and prep the surgical instruments. There's no time." "Then let her help," the ghost thought came, sharp and clear in his mind. "You gave her senses. Give her claws." It was a mad idea. The risk of a full neural cascade was immense, but they were out of options. "Vera," he sent, focusing his intent, projecting the idea to both of her consciousnesses. "I'm patching you into the ship's tactical grid, the point defense cannons. Can you control them?" A surge of something came back through the weave. Not a word, but a feeling, a primal, overwhelming affirmation, an unshakable confidence that was pure warrior instinct. Trusting her, trusting his own creation, Elias rerouted the primary controls. The effect was instantaneous and stunning. On the tactical display, the ship's automated defense systems, usually sluggish and predictive, came alive. In the medbay, Vera stood perfectly still, her eyes closed, her mind one with the ship's cannons. A swarm of Omnicorp microdrones shot from the Terminus. Before the Penance's targeting computer could even register them, the dorsal and ventral cannons swiveled and fired, spitting bolts of coherent light. Each shot was a perfect, impossible hit, detonating the drones in silent, brilliant flashes. It was a symphony of destruction. Elias piloted with a raw, desperate instinct, calling out vectors and roll angles. "Incoming missile, port side, brake high." He threw the ship into a climb, and without a moment's hesitation, the port cannon tracked the incoming projectile and vaporized it. She wasn't just firing, she was anticipating. She was feeling the battle through the ship's sensors, her combat reflexes operating at the speed of thought. Jax, accustomed to predictable programmed defenses, was caught completely off guard. The Penance, a humble workshop, was suddenly fighting with the ferocity of a veteran predator. "Shields are regenerating," Elias said, a breathless laugh of disbelief escaping him. They were surviving. They were more than surviving. They were winning. "She says it's like breathing," the ghost relayed, a sense of awe in her message. Elias glanced at the medbay monitor. Vera's face was serene, a stark contrast to the beautiful chaos she was unleashing. For the first time, the synaptic weave was not a source of pain. It was an extension of her will. Together, they were something more than the sum of their parts. A single, perfectly synchronized entity of pilot and gunner, human and Lorian, creator and creation. They found it by chance, a shadow within a shadow. A massive, hollowed-out asteroid, its core mined out generations ago, leaving a network of dark, silent caverns. Elias guided the battered Penance into the largest opening, the ship's landing struts groaning as they made contact with the uneven rock floor. He killed the main drive, and the sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the hiss of emergency life support and the frantic thumping of his own heart. On the tactical display, the terminus was a red predator, beginning a methodical sweep of the outer asteroid field. They had bought themselves time, but not much. "This is it," Elias said, his voice echoing slightly in the cockpit. He sent the message through the weave, a calm, steady thought. "The surgery has to be now." He left the cockpit and walked to the medbay, his footsteps unnaturally loud on the metal deck. Vera was standing, leaning against the far wall, the combat high fading, replaced by a deep exhaustion. The lucidity was still there, held in place by the adrenaline of the fight. She watched him as he keyed open the door. The air hissed as the pressures equalized. He stopped a few feet from her, keeping his hands visible. "The final procedure," he began, speaking aloud but also projecting the meaning, the schematics, the risks through their link. "I have to sever the Omnicorp hardware completely, and then I have to reintegrate her." He glanced at the empty space beside Vera, acknowledging the ghost. "Your other self. Merge you back into one." "It could kill us," the ghost's thought was a whisper in his mind, a full system rejection. "I know," Elias said, his gaze locked with the physical Vera's, "but it's the only way to be free, both of you." Physical Vera studied his face, her golden eyes searching for any sign of deception. She saw only exhaustion, guilt, and a desperate, unwavering sincerity. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was the most profound gesture of trust he had ever witnessed. He prepared the surgical suite, his movements economical and precise, the sterile field, the microscalpels, the neural dampeners. She lay on the biobed, watching him, her body still but for the slow rise and fall of her chest. The air in the small room was thick with a strange, potent intimacy. This was more vulnerable than any physical act. He was about to hold her mind, her very soul in his hands. He sat on a stool beside her head, his proximity making the fine muscles in her jaw tense. "I need to expose the primary interface port, at the base of your skull." She nodded again, tilting her head to grant him access. He gently brushed her corded hair aside, his fingers momentarily grazing the warm gray skin of her neck. A shiver ran through her, a reaction so potent he felt the echo of it through the weave. His own breath caught. He focused on the task, his engineer's mind taking over. He located the port, a small, seamless panel of metal fused to her vertebrae. He touched it, and the panel slid open with a soft click, revealing the delicate, pulsating fiber optics within. "I'm going in," he whispered, as much to himself as to her. "Stay with me." The inside of the synaptic weave was a storm of light and sound. Elias, mentally connected, navigated the corrupted architecture while his physical hands guided microscopic tools. The ghost was his beacon, a point of pure, calm light in the raging sea of red alert subroutines and weaponized code. He worked with the focused intensity of a bomb disposal expert, sweat beading on his forehead. Each Omnicorp firewall he dismantled, each weaponized protocol he severed, felt like snipping a wire on a live detonator. Suddenly, the ship shuddered violently. A deep grinding roar echoed through the asteroid. "Hull breach imminent in Sector Gamma," the computer announced calmly. "Jax is cutting through the rock." "He found us," the ghost's thought was sharp with alarm. "He can't have us," Elias growled, his concentration absolute. "Not now." He pushed deeper, his mental and physical actions a blur of practiced precision. He reached the central processor, the heart of Vera's torment. The Omnicorp hardware was a parasitic growth, a black, crystalline cancer on the elegant matrix of his original design. Another shudder, more violent this time. A shower of rock dust rained down from the med bay ceiling. Elias didn't flinch. "Vera, I have to initiate the merge. You're going to be incapacitated for a moment. Just hold on." He sent the command. On his console, the partition sector containing the ghost dissolved. Her pure data flooded the main system. For a moment, there was chaos. Two consciousnesses, two sets of memories, battled for dominance in a single space. Vera's body arched on the biobed, a silent scream of effort on her face. Her vital signs spiked, then flatlined. "Elias!" The ghost's final, terrified thought screamed in his mind before she was lost in the storm. "No," he grunted, pushing past his own panic. He sent a powerful surge of his own focusing energy through the weave, a command built on his intimate knowledge of its core. Integrate, heal, be whole. He used his physical hands to make the final critical cut, severing the black crystal from the mainboard. He pulled it free, a dark, ugly thing in his forceps. The chaos in the weave ceased. The violent red on his monitor faded to a calm, steady green. In the med bay, Vera's body went limp. For a terrifying second, there was nothing. Then she took a deep, shuddering breath. Her golden eyes opened. They were no longer flickering with pain or clouded by a feral haze. They were deep, clear, and anciently intelligent. The pain was gone. The ghost was home. She looked at Elias, and in that gaze was a universe of gratitude, of understanding, of a bond forged in a crucible he could barely comprehend. A final, bone-jarring impact threw him from his stool. The terminus's cutting beam broke through into their cavern. Vera sat up, her movements no longer coiled or hesitant, but fluid and lethally precise. She swung her legs off the bed. My turn. She strode to the med bay's internal console, her fingers dancing over the controls, patching herself back into the tactical grid. But this was different. There was no fugue state, no primal rage. There was only cold, calculated focus, her full tactical knowledge now unhindered and married to the lightning speed of the weave. On the main view screen, Jax's gunship filled the view, its primary weapon charging. "He's overpowering the shields," Elias said, scrambling back into the cockpit chair. "He thinks we're trapped." Vera's voice came over the internal comms, calm and resonant, free of the rasp of disuse. "He is mistaken. He is a predator who has cornered himself with his prey. Engineer, I need you to give me targeting solutions for the asteroid's structural stress points, the ones you noted on our way in." Elias's eyes widened. He hadn't told her about those. He had made the calculations subconsciously, a habit of his analytical mind, but she had seen them, felt them, through their connection. He didn't question it. His fingers flew over the navigation console, pulling up geological scans and projecting them onto her tactical display. 3 critical points, deep within the rock tunnels Jax was carving, glowed with potential. Firing the workshop lasers at those points simultaneously should trigger a catastrophic collapse, Elias confirmed, his voice filled with a new energy. But the backlash will be immense. We'll have to be clear. "I will handle the timing," Vera said. Her confidence was absolute. She took control of the ship, her mastery of its systems now complete. The Penance shot from its hiding place, not in a panicked retreat, but in a daring, calculated feint. Jax, surprised by the maneuver, gave chase, following them deeper into the unstable network of tunnels. "He's in position," Elias said, tracking the terminus on his screen. "Fire on my mark," Vera commanded. She threw the Penance into a gut-wrenching turn, sliding the ship through a narrow fissure Elias would have deemed impossible. For a split second, their main view screen showed the pursuing terminus perfectly framed by the 3 glowing target points. "Mark." Elias slammed his hand down on the controls for the ship's powerful industrial-grade mining lasers. 3 beams of intense energy, designed for slicing through asteroids, lanced out and struck their targets. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, the entire asteroid groaned. Fissures spread like lightning across the tunnel walls. The rock around the terminus began to crumble, then collapse inward, an avalanche of stone and ice burying the Omnicorp ship in a silent, final tomb. Silence descended in the cockpit of the Penance. They were safe. They were alone. The adrenaline faded, leaving behind a profound exhaustion and a connection that hummed between them, no longer needing a machine to exist. Elias leaned his head back, closing his eyes. He felt a presence beside him and opened them. Vera stood there, her powerful frame outlined by the soft glow of the console lights. She was no longer the caged animal from the auction. She was magnificent. She reached out, and he flinched almost imperceptibly, a vestige of ingrained caution. Her hand stopped, then continued, slow and deliberate, until her cool fingers rested against his cheek. It was the first gentle, intentional touch she had ever given. It held more weight, more meaning than any words could convey. He covered her hand with his own. The bond was complete. She was not his acquisition, and he was not her savior. They were partners, survivors. "Where to?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Vera looked away from him, her gaze drifting to the star-dusted infinity visible through the viewport. A small, genuine smile touched her lips for the very first time. "Somewhere," she said, her voice filled with a universe of possibility, "they'll never find us." Elias smiled back, a true unburdened smile. He turned to the controls, his hands moving with renewed purpose. He engaged the FTL drive, and with a flash of brilliant, impossible light, the Penance and its two finally free occupants vanished into the unknown. Their journey together was just beginning. 3 standard years. That was the measure of their peace, tallied in the slow, graceful orbits of Kylos's twin suns. One a brilliant gold, the other a soft, retiring crimson. They had found the planet by a whisper and a prayer, a ghost in a forgotten star chart Elias had unearthed from a derelict data core. It was a world untouched, uncatalogued, and alive with a quiet, breathing magic. Their home was a testament to their union, a fusion of his mind and her spirit. Elias had woven the structure into the landscape, a low-slung dome of smart alloys and transparent aluminum built around the heart of a colossal, petrified tree. Its sweeping, fossilized roots formed the foundation while living bioluminescent vines, which Vera had coaxed from the forest, crept across the exterior, their gentle blue-green light pulsing in time with the planet's magnetic field. Inside his workshop was a temple of clean, orderly technology, but the living space was hers. Soft, moss-like rugs cushioned the floors. The air was filled with the scent of alien blossoms and the rich, dark soil from her rooftop garden. From here, they could watch the great, silent herds of crystalline grazers move across the plains, their facets catching the dual sunlight in a cascade of rainbows. Their language had become one of comfortable silence, punctuated by shared glances and the faint, residual hum of the connection they still shared. The synaptic weave was gone, but its ghost remained, an echo, a pathway of understanding between them that words could never fully replicate. He would feel her contentment as she tended her garden, a warm, sun-drenched sensation in the back of his mind. She would sense his quiet satisfaction when a complex piece of code finally compiled, a clean, crisp feeling of order falling into place. Vera had healed in ways Elias hadn't thought possible. The scars on her skin remained, pale silver threads against her gray skin, but the scars on her soul had begun to fade. The feral, cornered thing from the auction block was a distant memory, a ghost she had made peace with. She moved with a liquid grace that was no longer coiled for violence, but attuned to the rhythms of the living world around her. She had rediscovered a part of her Lorian heritage that Omnicorp's labs had tried to extinguish, a deep, instinctual connection to the natural world. She could read the weather in the twitch of a leaf, find water by the hum of the earth, and sing the nocturnal vines into a brighter, more vibrant luminescence. This evening, they sat on the veranda overlooking the vast purple plains as the crimson sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of violet and rose. Elias was sketching on a datapad, designing a new atmospheric moisture collector for Vera's garden. She was polishing a piece of obsidian rock she'd found by the river, her powerful hands working it into a smooth, gleaming sculpture. A comfortable silence stretched between them, filled only by the chirps of arboreal creatures and the whisper of the evening breeze. He felt a flicker of amusement from her, a soft, warm pulse. He looked up from his work. "What is it?" he asked. She held up the obsidian, which now perfectly resembled the grumpy, rodent-like face of the info broker who had sold him the auction key on Xylos. Elias chuckled, a deep, genuine sound that was common now. "The resemblance is uncanny," he admitted. She smiled, the expression still a small, rare miracle to him. His fear had a very specific shape. Her hands, which had once been weapons of devastating efficiency, were now tools of creation. It was, he thought, the ultimate proof of their victory. They hadn't just survived. They had built something beautiful in the quiet corners of the galaxy. But the past was a persistent ghost, and even in paradise, its shadow could fall. The Penance, their ark and their battleground, lay scuttled in a deep, silent canyon a few kilometers from their home, a memorial they couldn't bring themselves to dismantle completely, and sometimes the ghosts of old machines held on to their secrets. The next day, Elias decided to salvage the ship's primary reactor core. Their home's power systems were stable, but a redundant energy source was a logical precaution. As he cut through the scorched and twisted hull of the Penance, a glint of metal caught his eye, wedged deep within a mangled conduit. It was a data chip, heavily armored and bearing the unmistakable insignia of an Omnicorp black box recorder. It must have been torn from the terminus during its destruction, a final, jettisoned piece of wreckage that had embedded itself in his own ship's frame. He brought it back to the workshop, his brow furrowed in thought. He placed it on his workbench, the small, dark rectangle seeming to absorb the light in the room. Vera came to stand in the doorway, her arms crossed. She said nothing, but he felt her unease, a cool draft against the warmth of their usual connection. "It's from Jax's ship," he said quietly. "A flight recorder, I think. Most of the data is probably corrupted beyond recovery." "We are safe here," she said, her voice a low murmur. It was not a question. "I know, but if there's any chance, any loose ends, any tracking data that might have survived, I need to know." He looked at her, his eyes earnest. "I just want to be sure it's truly over." She watched him for a long moment, her golden eyes unblinking. She saw the familiar, restless drive in him, the engineer's need to solve the puzzle, the man's need to protect what was his. She did not like it. It felt like inviting a ghost to their table. But she also knew that for him, a question left unanswered was a wound left to fester. She gave a slow, reluctant nod. "Be careful, Elias," she whispered. "Some doors should remain closed." He turned back to the chip, already lost in the challenge. The work was painstaking. The chip was designed to resist intrusion, its outer layers encrypted with military-grade Omnicorp ciphers. For days, the workshop was filled with the low hum of his decryption servers and the soft tapping of his fingers on holographic keys. Vera kept her distance, but she was never far. She would bring him food, a mug of the hot, fragrant tea she made from local leaves, and simply stand behind him, a silent, watchful presence. Her stillness was a comfort, an anchor that kept the ghosts of the past from overwhelming him. One night, as the twin suns slept and the forest outside pulsed with soft, ethereal light, he hit a wall. The final layer of encryption was a biometric lock, keyed to Jax's specific cybernetic signature, a signature that no longer existed. He threw his hands up in frustration, leaning back in his chair and rubbing his tired eyes. "It's useless," he muttered. "It's keyed to his neural pattern. It's a dead end." Vera moved from the shadows. She came to stand behind his chair, her hands resting gently on his shoulders. Her touch was warm, grounding. Through their connection, she felt his frustration, the sharp, bitter taste of failure. "You are trying to break down the door," she said, her voice soft in the quiet room. "But you taught me that every system has a back door, a failsafe." He looked up at her, confused. "This is Omnicorp tech, Vera. It's all walls and weapons." "You are thinking like an engineer," she replied, a faint smile in her voice. He felt it in his mind. "Think like a creator, like the man who hid a soul inside a machine." Her words struck a chord. He had built the Weave with redundancies, with hidden protocols. Omnicorp had built their systems on top of his framework, but they had never fully understood its foundation. He had been attacking the lock, the Omnicorp layer. He needed to find the original hardware's diagnostic port, a foundation he himself had laid. He closed his eyes, his hands covering hers on his shoulders. He let her calm, steady presence wash over him, clearing the frustration from his mind. He didn't need to see the code. He just needed to remember the feel of it, the shape of his own creation. He reached out, his fingers dancing across the holographic interface, not with frantic energy, but with the fluid certainty of a musician playing a familiar song. He found a subharmonic frequency, a tiny, forgotten echo of his own original work, and pushed. There was a soft click. The red lock icon on his screen turned green. The final layer of encryption dissolved. He had opened the door not with force, but with memory. With her help, he leaned back, pulling her hands from his shoulders and bringing them to his lips, kissing her knuckles. "Thank you," he whispered. The contents of the chip began to stream onto his main screen. It wasn't just a flight recorder. It was a complete asset file. Jax's mission logs, schematics, and a list. Elias's blood ran cold. The file was titled Chimera Program Asset Roster. His eyes scanned the designations. Lot 734 Vera, Lorian specimen, Weave interface unstable, sold for recovery loss. And then below her is another line. Lot 735 Kalen, Thraxian specimen, Weave interface unstable, decommissioned. Lot 736 Zainara, Signian specimen, Weave interface unstable, decommissioned. The list went on, a litany of pain and death, each one a failed experiment, a life destroyed by his technology. He felt Vera stiffen behind him as she read the names, her own past staring back at her from the screen. Then they saw the final entry, separate from the others. Lot 737, subject unknown, Kython specimen. Weave interface pending, currently in cryostasis at Omnicorp Black Site Omega. Stored, not decommissioned. Not sold, stored. There was another one, another soul trapped in the dark, waiting for a monster to be made of them. He scrolled down further, past the technical data, and found Jax's final mission briefing. His objective wasn't just to recover Vera, it was to secure Elias. The report stated that Omnicorp had been unable to replicate the stability of his original weave design. All their attempts had resulted in violent, psychotic breakdowns in the subjects. They hadn't understood that the weave wasn't just hardware. It required a delicate, symbiotic balance. They had concluded that Elias, its creator, was the only one who could make their new generation of assassins work. They weren't being hunted because Vera was a failed prototype. They were being hunted because together she was a success. And Omnicorp wanted the key. The log confirmed that with Jax's failure, all assets connected to the Chimera program were to be scrubbed. Black Site Omega was scheduled for sanitization. The remaining prototype, Lot 737, was to be incinerated. The threat wasn't coming for them anymore. They had won their peace. Jax was gone, the Terminus was wreckage, and Kylos was a perfect secret sanctuary. They could erase the data, destroy the chip, and live out their lives in the quiet paradise they had earned. They could close the door. Elias looked at the screen, at the designation for an unknown life, hanging on the precipice of oblivion. He felt Vera's hand tighten on his shoulder. He didn't have to look at her to know what she was thinking. He felt it through their bond. The echo of her own pain, the memory of a lightless cage, the fierce protective fire that he had helped to free. Their peace, their paradise, would be meaningless if it was built on the ashes of another. He turned his head, his cheek brushing against her hand. He looked into her luminous golden eyes. There was no question there, only a quiet, resolute certainty. Their journey hadn't ended when they escaped the Veil. It had only been a new beginning. Their stasis facility is automated, Elias said softly, his mind already working, already seeing the schematics, the security protocols, the impossible path forward. But its power core is unstable. A resonance cascade, if timed correctly, could trigger a full system shutdown without alerting Omnicorp's central command for at least a cycle. Vera's lips curved into a dangerous, beautiful smile. "And I know a very good engineer," she murmured, her voice a low, perfect harmony with his thoughts. Their quiet life was over, but their new purpose, a purpose they had chosen together, had just begun.